like the one that surprised me most, I guess, was the Kristaps move.
Yeah, that's where I was
Like,
gonna go. That's
yeah,
that trade made me. We were on the draft show, and it made me just put my hands up. Like, what are we? What's going on? Like, I wasn't ready for a Porzingis trade. I really
yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, like, here's the funny thing too. Like, Dallas is pretty good. They figured it out since their early season struggles, and he's been like a pretty substantial part of that. Like, it's not like he has, completely fallen off a cliff in terms of his play. He's not worth 31, 34, and 36 million, which is what he has left on his contract. But he's still like really good at basketball is part of the thing. Like,
Right.
it's kind of a Tobias Harris corollary thing where I think Tobias Harris just gets unfairly shit on all the time, despite the fact that Tobias Harris is actually a good basketball player. Like, Kristaps is still a good basketball player. It's just that, like, I don't think he's reliable because you don't know if he's going to be on the court in the moments that matter because of his injury history. And you can't really trust him to create shots. The other part of this deal that just confuses me is like, what is Washington? What is their plan?
Do they know? Do they know?
Like,
Like, that's my thing. Like, they did a great job in the Westbrook trade, right? And got
yeah,
some good pieces and things like that. Now the season has gone off the rails. You have Beal out with the year with the wrist surgery and things like that. And they're in a very critical situation of what are you going to do now with Bradley
yeah.
Beal, right? Like, is he
Like, look, I don't think that Washington deal for Westbrook was as good as like Bobby Marks thinks it was, where it was like one of the best deals of all time.
You're right.
But undeniably, they did well. Like, I think that getting off of that contract and getting who they got in terms of ancillary pieces to, potentially work, like, I think that they did fine getting those guys.
Yeah, and now, by the way, flipping one of those pieces, Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans to Dallas in that trade, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about Dallas's side here in a second. The when I look at Washington, I'm just like I'm confused, and I've been confused about Washington for a while. Like, let's just be
Yeah.
honest. Like, it's getting to the point where, like, what are you planning here? And I'm
Yeah.
kind of shocked. Like, Beal still hasn't demanded a trade. Like,
Yeah.
every time I'm like, yo, like, how long are you just willing to sit there and continue to be, to be honest, be irrelevant? Like, you don't, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't, you're young, you're 28 at this point, and he's going to opt into his contract with the wrist surgery and things like that, I would imagine. And then they're going to try to give him the super duper max. And then, so we're going to play this dance. And then a year from now, you're going to demand the trade. Like, you're just wasting your time. I think I don't understand the plan for Washington. It's a big swing on Porzingis, who's never healthy. But I guess the hope is like, hey, if we're healthy, we can have a pretty good defense. He's a good rim protector when he's right. Kyle Kuzma has been really good defensively. KCP's
Yeah.
been pretty good this season. Like, they got some pieces. Rui Hachimura, Denny Advia, they've all been good, and on the
Yeah.
defensive end and things like that. So maybe that's the thinking of like, hey, we're just going to start to pivot to being a really good defensive team. I would be very worried. And granted, they got off. They're paying Porzingis a ton more money, but his deal is shorter than I think Davis Bertans. So getting off Bertans
It
was
is by
probably
a
a
year.
win for them. And
Yeah.
I think that's pretty good. And Dinwiddie hasn't worked out for them. Like, it's not like they gave up a massive player in Dinwiddie. But I'm just curious. It's just like, we'll trade you our 2 bad contracts for your really bad contract. Like, I get confused with that.
So let's talk about the Washington side first, because the thing that I can't wrap my head around in Washington is center has been like the least of their worries this year. Like, they've gotten pretty good production from Daniel Gafford. They've gotten pretty good production from Montrezl Harrell, who they moved in a ancillary deal to Charlotte, who we'll talk about that in a minute, because I think that's actually an interesting deal as well. But like, Montrezl Harrell's been really valuable as a scorer off the bench. Daniel Gafford is a good defender. You just gave Daniel Gafford a pretty big extension. Like, you're paying him $10 million a year now. That's not a terrible contract for a backup center, but like, and I guess you didn't really use assets to get off of this. Like, it seemed like they wanted to end the Spencer Dinwiddie experience.
Right.
They, were happy to move the Davis Bertans contract because it's a negative value contract. So it's not like they gave up assets. It's just like, you've now completely limited your flexibility moving forward. Like, it's easier to trade 2 mid-size contracts than it is to trade one enormous contract. And obviously this deal is an example of the fact that nobody in the NBA is completely untradeable. Even Russell Westbrook is not completely untradeable. He just, in the midseason, it's hard to find partners that work, right? There's no contract that is completely untradeable. This Porzingis deal can be moved again, but it's easier to move, I think, Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie if you want to try and get flexible and make some different moves. And I know Kristaps is good, and like he's a 20 to 25 million dollar a year player when he's healthy, something like that. Maybe honestly, when he's healthy, he's probably more like 25 to 30 in terms of
Right.
value. But you can't trust that, which makes it, reduce in value to an extent. And you're now just setting up like this. My guess on what Washington was thinking is we need to make a move to convince Brad that we are trying to get better around him. Porzingis is a swing, at least. I don't.
I'm frustrated with franchises that make those types of moves, like these massive swings
Yeah.
that just don't make sense. Like here's a couple of things here. First off, it's like they unlearned what they learned in the Westbrook trade, right? Trading the big contract for 3 smaller contracts made things a lot more manageable, right? They unlearned it because they basically just reversed and did it all over again. But like when you think about it this way, like when the Milwaukee Bucks made the swing for Drew Holiday, it made perfect sense, right? We were all going nuts about how good Drew Holiday was because Drew Holiday had a track record of helping teams and being solid.
They were much closer to competing than Washington is.
Right. And so when you're looking at, let me put it to you this way. If Porzingis was as productive in Dallas the way Drew Holiday was in New Orleans, he wouldn't have even been on the trade market. Right? Like, because that's what they need. What they need from Porzingis, what Washington's going to need from Porzingis is what Dallas needed from him with Luka. Right? And if you're not going to get that, and Dallas understands, hey, we're not getting that. We need to get rid of it. And Washington's like, we can get it. It's like, it's just a wild, reckless swing to me. And at that point, that's when I'm looking at it going like, if you're chasing like that, you've already lost. And maybe you get lucky. Maybe it works out. Knock on wood, Porzingis has good health and it works out and it's great because I love having more good basketball teams than bad basketball teams in the NBA. But I just think it's a wild gamble. And now you've made it a very difficult contract to move. Because I'll just be honest with you, I don't imagine somebody, if Washington's going to put Porzingis back on the trade market, I don't imagine you're going to get a taker. You're going to have to send an asset with that. No, I know what you're saying. It's tradable. But you have to send an asset with that.
You probably will, but it gets easier. The longer it goes, like if he can be there for a year, he can be there for a year and a half. The contract gets shorter. Teams are more willing to deal with shorter term big money contracts than they are with longer term big money contracts. So I like this more for this is the funny thing. Like we're talking about all of the flexibility concerns now. Kristaps Porzingis is still a good basketball player. Like for all the concerns that we have, like I have worries about just what the plan is in Washington. But in terms of like a value-based construct here, right? Washington gave up a guy that they were getting like negative value from in Spencer Dinwiddie on the court. Like he's just been not very good this year. And another guy that's, a 3-point sniper that's shooting 32% from 3 in Davis Bertans to get a guy that's good at basketball. Like that's, if you're going to take Kristaps Porzingis, that's the kind of deal that you do it in, I think.
No, I'm with you on that. I just think the chances of getting what you really need out of him to convince Bradley Beal to stay is very slim, in my opinion.
And I totally agree with you in terms of like just the bigger picture. I think you're 100% right on that.
And that's what I mean more in the you're chasing, right? It's really chasing at that point. And as a franchise, you don't want to be chasing. Honestly, they should have traded Beal a year ago. When they traded,
I think they should have traded him last summer.
When you're trading Westbrook, when you're trading, in this situation, you should have just gone for the full rebuild and try to do it quickly and gather assets. You're telling me you couldn't have gotten Simmons a whole bunch. You probably could have gotten more draft picks even in this instance from Philadelphia over the summer Like if you wanted to make that move, now you're gonna have to try to pay this dude the super duper max, only for him to turn around and demand a trade. Like it's inevitable, right? Like I just feel like that's what's
Yeah,
coming.
it's a good question. Like, if you were a Wizards fan, and I don't know how Wizards fans would feel about this. If you were a Wizards fan, though, would you rather be in the position you are right now, where you have Porzingis, all of these Lakers guys, Avdia, Rui Hachimura, Corey Kispert, and Bradley Beal, who still has like a player option on that deal? Or would you rather have kind of blown this thing up, moved KCP in a deal, move Bradley Beal, have Ben Simmons in place, don't have Kristaps Porzingis. Maybe you do have Kristaps. Maybe you still execute this trade. By the way,
Yeah.
maybe it's KCP and um, Davis Bertans for Kristaps, right? Because that works money wise, just off the top of my head. But like, maybe you still do this deal because Kristaps works with Ben Simmons. But like, would you rather have Ben Simmons and a start over? Or would you rather have the position you're in now where you have better players, but like the better players aren't good enough to actually compete? I think it's easier to sell hope in the case where you have Ben Simmons as your building block. You're probably in the high end of the lottery this year and you're figuring it out that way. But look, I don't know. I don't know if every fan feels that way.
I don't know, and it's challenging, and I also think the idea of like, I have friends with who are fans of teams who I'm like, you guys should be really more interested in trading for Simmons, and they have fans have no interest sometimes trading for
Yeah,
Simmons in the sense of like, and if we're talking about it on the fan side of it, there is some of that. Like I can understand it where it's like, why would I trust Ben Simmons to give me hope,
right.
right? And so I understand it on that side. It's a tough thing, man. And one thing is, as critical as we are of all these the trades and all of these things, being a front office guy is tough. Making
It's so
trades and
hard.
all this, it's a very hard job. Like I understand it. I went through it as a video guy. Like it's difficult. So it's like, the second guessing comes with it, but it's hard and it's hard to kind of
Yeah.
predict these things.
On the other side of this, though, is Dallas. And I understand the idea that they went for here. They broke the Porzingis deal up into two more manageable trade chips, basically. Uh, I think they're going to have an easier time moving Spencer Dinwiddie in a deal and Davis Bertans in a deal to try and rebuild and completely retool around Luka Doncic. For this year, it's worse. Like they're a worse team. They're definitely a worse team this year. Um, they have a lot of ball handling, which is interesting. Like Spencer Dinwiddie, Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic are three of your like four or five best players now. I guess like Tim Hardaway, sort of, and then Dorian
Well, he's
Finney
got,
Smith.
well, Hardaway has the broken foot.
Yeah, like I'm kind of, is he gonna? I was assuming he'd be back for the playoffs. Is he not gonna be back for the playoffs?
I I will Google this as you need to fill time while I type this up.
Yeah. But like Dorian Finney Smith's been really good this year, and but now you're going to be completely retooling what Jason Kidd has been doing on the fly, and I'm just confused, I guess, on what their ultimate goal here is. Like, is the ultimate goal we can't win a title this year, but we have the guy that can lead us to the title. So we want to get more flexible. We want to set up our situation in a way that allows us to be lighter on our feet in acquiring a real second star to place next to Luka Doncic. Like I think that's the sell for Dallas here.
Yeah, I think it's first, it's generally a 3-month injury according to the internet, and the internet has never told lies, folks.
Not about
Um,
injuries.
no. So you could take it with a grain of salt, but I think Hardaway's probably done for the year. What
Okay.
couple of things there. One, with the multiple ball handlers. Like the one thing Dallas is doing is they are getting Luka off the ball. Like they're starting a
Yeah.
lot of actions with somebody else handling the ball and him coming to it. And I actually kind of love it. And I think now that he's in shape, it looks a lot better and it flows a lot easier offensively, and it allows everybody else to be a little more involved offensively. So I think that's part of it. I think the other aspect of it, and I think it's something we've been talking about when we've talked about this trade, it will be easier down the road to find a home for Dinwiddie and to find a home for Bertans. Assuming
Yeah.
Bertans is too good of a shooter to have all of a sudden not be able to shoot all now, right?
Yeah, and he's the kind of like long distance shooter where he can shoot from like 30 feet that will give Luca even more space, which
Right.
is
And
interesting on some level.
so it's a little bit weird that he just I still think he'll find his shot again. And with Dinwiddie, I think the important thing to look at is it's not excuse me. Gonna have to edit that one out. With
We won't be editing that in post. We'll be good. We'll be good
Oh,
now.
okay. So everybody, yes, thank you, because I assumed half of you said bless you. The other half, screw you. Always nice to tell the audience, screw you. But with Dinwiddie, I think you're getting what you're hoping is you're getting the Dinwiddie before KD and Irving showed up in Brooklyn, right? Like he was a solid player. I think he's a guy that can come off your bench, and when Luka's out of the game, getting rest and however few minutes that is, you can kind of turn
Yeah.
it over to Dinwiddie a little bit more and say, go ahead, you and Jalen Brunson cook here and try to make some stuff happen so
Yeah.
we don't really kind of bury ourselves in a hole. But you're right about one thing. This trade definitely makes them worse this season. And I think that was their understanding. And I think they looked at it saying, hey, they just extended Dorian Finney-Smith's 4 years, $52 million deal. They know that they're going to have to sign Jalen Brunson in the offseason. I think they're kind of having that understanding. I won't be surprised if there are more moves in the offseason where they start sending off some of these guys. Listen, if I'm Dinwiddie, if I'm Bertans, I'd probably rent until next season. Like you might get spun off at some point in the offseason to continue to build stuff for Luka. I think it's more of a play of like long term, let's start to get pieces that we can move and build.